Hello, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and you are joining us today with Crime Writers of Canada as we celebrate the nominees for the Awards of Excellence of 2024. I'm happy today to have one of my Vancouver friends on, and also always a pleasure to talk to Iona Whishaw. Hi, Iona. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good too. I was very happy to hear that To Track a Traitor had been nominated for the Whodunit Award for Best Traditional Mystery, sponsored by Jane Doe. I want to give you my humble opinion. I think you could start applying for Best Novel. It was one of my most favorite novels of this year, and I was hoping to see it there, but good luck for Traditional Mystery.
Thank you very much. I was pretty chuffed myself.
A little bit about you. So, Iona Whishaw has been a youth worker, social worker, teacher, and award winning high school principal who continued with her writing throughout her working life. Receiving her master's in creative writing from UBC, Iona has published short fiction, poetry, poetry translation, and one children's book, Henry and the Cow Problem. Iona is best known for the Lane Winslow Mystery series. Debuting with the novel A Killer in King's Cove, readers are introduced to Lane Winslow, a war-weary young ex-intelligence officer who in 1946 leaves London to look for a fresh start. When she finds herself happily settled in a sleepy hamlet of interior BC, surrounded by suitably eclectic cast of small-town characters, she feels like she finally able to put her past to rest. And then a body is discovered, which is how every crime novel begins. I'm happy to say that her next novel will be number 11, so we'll talk about that a little bit too. But let's first start with Tataka Trader. The traitor in this story is Lane's estranged sister, Diana, who it quickly becomes clear to most readers that Lane and her sister, Diana, are quite different. So could you tell us a little bit about the sisters and their relationship?
Sure. Diana is has had the benefit of being really having positive attention from their one parent, and Lane really has had to, make do on her own somehow, and so I think they've always had a contentious relationship because of that parental inequality of attention. And, Diana's a bit more, I mean, they're both pretty internal. They don't share secrets with each other. They don't have that kind of sisterly relationship and never have. And so it feels sharp between them all the time. But it's pretty evident to me as I'm working with them that there's a real a bond there. There's even some love there. It comes out reluctantly from time to time, but it does show up, and I think it kind of it surprised me, and I was pleased with how they ended it in the book. I think Lane is very, very surprised because she sees her sister as kind of selfish and, always looking out for her own self and wanting to have a good time all the time. That it really, really surprised her sister after not seeing her throughout the whole war that A, she'd engaged in intelligence herself and at quite a dangerous level, and B, she had become much more serious and somehow almost a little bit hardened. And so I think that for Lane, that means that I think she has a bit more empathy for her than she might have before.
I hope you don't mind me pointing out, I found it very funny when you said that you were happy that the relationship recovered at the end of the novel because you're a famous pantser. So probably when you first started writing that, you didn't know how the relationship was going to turn out,
I
did you?
did not.
One thing she also has to do, Lane has to do, is air travel. And it's quite different than it is today. Everything about it, like the way she receives a message, and I don't want to say too much, but it's a family crisis. It's not like today where we grumble today about having to travel, and it's just like, oh, it's going to cost me $500 and I'm going to have to go, maybe wait in line an hour. Air travel was very different back then, and I know you love your research, so could you tell us a little bit about the ordeals of air travel?
Well, I think planes were, they had converted some military planes into passenger planes. And they still didn't, they were cold and they were super noisy. And, you had to sort of, to go from where Lane is living, you have to take the train back to Vancouver and fly out of Vancouver. And you have to stop and fuel along the way. So it all takes longer. And I think it's quite exhausting and it's quite expensive. And so people don't undertake it lightly. I mean, we're in the middle of a period where if it hadn't been for the war, people would still be sailing on the Queen Mary to get over to the old country kind of thing, right? So, yeah, I think it's fairly grueling. And, they're still landing at Croydon Airport, which was a sort of military airport. So the great advances in air travel have yet to come.
I was on your website today and looking over actually a blog you wrote in 2022. And you and I have talked about this before, but it was titled Using Language to Set the Times. So, as we mentioned, this is at this point, I don't know what, 1948?
It's 1948, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so, you were saying how important it is that a novelist always it has to be conscious about the language they use because it sets a tone in the book, and even more importantly, when this is an historical book, and there's you go on to say how you could throw people out of the era very quickly by using language of today that didn't belong then. You've been doing this for a while, as we mentioned. This is book 11. Do you still have to do a lot of research, and does this language come easy to you, or do you have to look at every turn of phrase you use?
Well, obviously, there's many that I looked up earlier and can now use quite freely. But the thing about English is that it's just the most rapidly expanding, changing language ever. And we take a lot of expressions into use and have maybe used them for 10 years. And now they feel like they belong to right now. And so I still have to, even today, I was looking up. I wish I could remember what the expression was. Um, but I was looking it up because I wasn't sure how new it was. And it turned out to be very, very old. So, I've already got in my head, my either my beta reader or my editor saying, can we use this? It sounds modern. And being able to say, no, they've been saying it since the 1920s. Um, so I still have to, when I'm just writing along and I'll see a phrase and go, how new is that? So I always keep that. I think I mentioned on my webinar that time the website called Ngram. And I basically have it on some equivalent of speed dial, just to double check. And sometimes I'm very surprised to hear something is awfully new and I have to expunge it. And I don't think it hurts the books. I mean, it sounds like I'm trying to make the books kind of stuffy and full of old language, but I think the very opposite is true. I'm trying to recapture the kind of comfortable language that we use today amongst ourselves, but in that period, you know. Does that
Yeah,
make
that's
sense?
very fair. And like you said also in that blog, is it sets the tone. And I'm not 100% sure of this statement, but I think if somebody opened up a Lane Winslow book and read me two sentences without telling me it's your book, and maybe I haven't even read it, it's one of the earlier ones, and perhaps I didn't read it yet. I might be able to, if you said, who wrote that? I might be able to say, oh, that's Iona. Totally, that's Iona, just from the language you use. And I think that goes to every author having to find their voice, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about a different theme. I've talked to a few authors this season about romance in a long series. We all know sort of the trope that at the beginning, our protagonist might find somebody new that they're slightly attracted to, but maybe also repelled to. And as the relationship, or as the books go on, the relationship progresses. In your case, Darling is, I mean, they've been married, oh, I want to say
Like
four
barely a
books now.
year.
But yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
four
know.
books in now or so.
Yeah.
um, but that changes the relationship. So the romance, I don't want to say it's gone, but it's not that early relationship that people seem to really like to read about. Do you think about the romantic arc? You put a little bit of a dip in Attracted Trader that they spent time away from each other. Uh, but is romance something important that you write about, and how important is the arc?
I think so. I think I'm sort of deliberately making a plug for married love, if you will. Yes, of course, relationships change a bit when you go from the romance to the married part. But, at the same time, you're building a kind of character to who you are together. And what I like about Lane and Darling together is clearly the affection is there and the admiration. You know, there's always a danger in a book that I have sent to my publisher, number 12. There's a scene in there with some other characters who come from very educated American class, and they get married, and the man immediately reverts to type. And my uncle did this. He married a doctor, and immediately that he married her, he said she had to stop working. So there's this kind of thing where the male dominance that was culturally very common at that time takes over, and Darling doesn't have that. He in fact, in some ways, he trusts her more and respects her more, and she him. And I think that's something very valuable that I want to model, along with the kind of affection and humor that they have with each other.
I think one thing that you do, and I wish I thought about it earlier because I would have read it back to you, but there's so many great lines of how Darling just accepts the fact that she's going to insert herself into a case and solve it, probably before him. And even the people around them make comments. And you're right, because typically the cop is always like, you have to stick your nose out of this, even in book 20. It's like, but there's an acceptance that he has for her and her ways that's refreshing. And we could also plug the fact that Sergeant Terrell, and April have a relationship going. So those who want romance could still see the early levels of it, yeah,
And
in your
there's
books.
Tina, the lady mechanic, and Sergeant Ames.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So there's always new romances coming.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the new book. So you're in the middle of launching it. So thank you so much for taking time out to talk about your old book when you have a new book coming out. So Lightning Strikes the Silence seems to be like, I'm always amazed that you can think of new ideas and you always have themes in it. So could you tell us a little bit about some of the themes of this book and the inspiration?
Well, the inspiration came really long ago before I was even writing this series. I think I calculated maybe back in 2008 or something like that. I heard a program about a really remarkable thing that went on in World War II. And so I think I filed it at the back of my mind to um, to bring up later. I don't know how, but this felt to me like the book to bring it out in. And the other, I think, big theme for me was the area that I write about, the Kootenays, Columbia Valley, all of that area was a huge area where the Japanese were settled and interned during the war. So, after they were removed from the coast. And so I was very interested in that. And as I always am with historical things, I'm always interested in how people cope, when they're in the middle of a big historical moment, really. And one of the things I actually learned just a couple of weeks ago, a Japanese American writer has written a book called Evergreen, I think, about that period in LA and the Japanese removal from LA. And, the minute the war was over, they were already back trying to sort themselves and, found they couldn't get their property back and all the usual. And in Canada, Japanese people removed from the coast were not even allowed to return until after 1949. 1949, 4 years after the war. And I was very shocked by that. So that was a very interesting exploration for me because it means the war is over, but now people have to decide what they're going to do and where they're going to go and are they going to stay. And the other final thing that I really was excited about doing, there's an extraordinary Canadian called Dr. Masahiro Miyazaki. And he had been interned in Lillooet, and he was a doctor, and so he was immediately, almost immediately, pulled out of his internment and set to work doctoring because there was a terrible shortage of doctors. And one of the things he did was also serve as a coroner medical examiner. So many years ago, Laura Than White suggested this to me. She said, you should use him because he's a part of BC history. So I was very excited to learn about him, to read his book, and to have him turn up and do some coroner work in Nelson.
Well, that sounds like it's going to be fascinating. And it's coming out around now, today, tomorrow. Like by the time people are listening to it, they'll be able
it's
to.
out there.
Oh, all right, it's already out there, so people can read it now. That's the 11th
Yes.
in this series, and you're working on number 12 already. No rest. Well, I wish you the best of luck. Very much for this contest. I tell everybody I don't know who won. I know you're in some strict competition this year with some
Very much
icons,
so, yeah.
so I'm
I
going to wish
can't
you the
believe
best of luck.
that. I was very, very excited, and I was very excited to see all the other people on the list. It was a great experience for me. So I know they say it, but it's actually true. Being nominated is a great thing.
And I think you're collecting nominations now because I think the last three or four have been nominated. I think, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've
So it's
done
tradition
okay.
now.
Perennially the bridesmaid, but still in the wedding party.
That is great. Again, thank you so much for taking time to talk
My
with us
pleasure. It
today.
was lovely to talk to you, Eric, always.